Shadow, we are recording, so anything you say can and will be held against you.
No, it won't.
Lovely.
We don't hold anything against anybody.
All right.
That's what you just want us to think.
This is the AT Banter podcast, a balanced and entertaining look at assistive technology, accessibility, and its importance in people's lives. Join Rob Minot, Ryan Fleury, and Steve Barclay as they banter with people around the world about anything and everything regarding assistive technology and the disability community. Now, on with the show.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of AT Banter.
Banter.
My name. My name is Rob Minot, and joining me in the Anti-Zoom Room, Mr. Ryan Fleury.
Good morning.
And we have another voice in here that I just heard. Ryan, can you tell the fine folks who's joining us for today's episode?
Well, I'll tell the folks. I don't know about the fine folks, but joining us this week is a guest host who has been with us in the past. He is, or has, a long, extensive history in accessible gaming. He is Michael Feir.
Hello.
Now, when did we have you on? That
was around the time that A Hero's Call was coming out, I believe.
Oh,
would have been, my last game appearance. I'm not sure if I've done one about my guide or not. Can't really remember. That's caused a lot of activity. But yeah, that they released A Hero's Call on the computer back in 2018, and that caused quite a stir. That was easily the most successful audio Kickstarter that I've ever seen that was game related, and boy did they put it to good use.
Yeah, I think we've had you on a couple times over the years we've been doing this. So it's nice to actually have somebody join us who knows about accessible gaming, because I know nothing about it.
Well, especially given that today, Ryan, what are we talking about?
Today we are speaking with Thaddeus from Ebon Sky Studios about a project they are working on.
So wow, that's what a coincidence that we're having Mike on on the same day. We're talking about accessible video games. That's crazy. What are the chances?
These shows needs a raise.
Insanity.
Why don't we just take a minute and pick your brain, Mike, about what that space looks like at the moment, and how it's changed since last time we talked to you.
Well, there's been a lot of different things, particularly on the console side of things. We're really seeing a lot of push to and a growing awareness among sighted developers. And of course, EA Games making a lot of their sports, their football accessible. Apparently, their Madden NFL football can now be played by blind people. So there's been some really big, pretty epic things like that have happened. And of course, we have things like A Hero's Call out there now. So we've had a few really good audio game successes on the Kickstarter level. We have Dusklight Pro that's gearing up to release a big epic exploration audio game. So very much looking forward to that. So we seem to be going through a bit of a revival, and that's kind of neat. When I started this back in '96, when I launched Odyssey magazine, everything was text, and slowly we began to see a kind of a wave of audio games. And then we had a bit of a fade out, and now, thankfully, that seems we're in an upswing again. Maybe if enough games at once become accessible, I might even be tempted to get a console. But right now, it's so few that. To me, it's a bit of okay, you want me to spend $500 plus to get a console to play 3 games.
Yeah, well,
that's kind of where I'm stuck at the moment. It really has to become a more economic proposition for me.
So I really feel like there's some real space here to get some traction on accessible gaming that's above and beyond just a AAA studio tacking on accessibility features to their game. Which, don't get me wrong, I think that's really great. That's super important. video games are such a big part of the culture that preventing anybody from having those experiences as well is a really big deal, especially, for the younger generation.
The smart speaker space, again, with
Yes,
these
for
more
sure.
these audio games that they don't have to be simple to play. I think unfortunately there was a glut of real simple audio games that just were barely games at all. They didn't really have much mechanics. It was always about just choices leading to different endings or things like that, that there was no depth to the play. And I think, unfortunately, there's a bit of a pushback now against that developers have to contend with, because a bunch of us are so jaded. We want more complex stuff. We want, stuff that lasts longer. And unfortunately, you can't just start at square 20. You have to sort of crawl before you walk in learning, how to make a good audio game. And there's, unfortunately, the space to do that is it's a bit of a minefield, because if you don't sort of show that, yes, I can handle complexity too, there's serious game, it's not just fancy sound, then you're onto something. But you have to sort of really make sure you do that and put in that depth. And thankfully, it sounds like Ebon Sky Studios is really going to hit that spot.
Yeah.
With what they're trying to do with their RPG creation engine and their first game. And it all sounds like it will really sort of hit. It'll have the mechanics, it'll have the depth of play, and it'll also have the really immersive, great audio that will pull people in.
Yeah, and it's a big project, and we'll certainly talk to Thaddeus about it and have him fill us in. But I'm excited to talk to these guys, and I'm excited for accessible video games. I mean, a lot of people discount video games as just stuff that 14-year-olds play, but you're absolutely right. There are so many positive aspects of it, from just being able to be involved in conversation, because video games are such a big component of daily life these days, but also education. And I mean, there's all kinds of benefits to video games these days. So, and that's part of the reason why we thought, we want to get somebody on to talk more about what's happening in that space, because I think that community support is so important for this stuff.
Yes.
Especially,
it's vital. It's absolutely, if we can show, and that might involve, it's writing reviews, it's making it known that you appreciate this stuff. It also might mean taking the odd risk, jumping in, buying something before you're really sure it's quite your thing.
Yep.
And seeing, giving it that chance.
Hi everyone, this is Steve from Canadian Assistive Technologies, and this is a shameless plug. We've been working hard to find less expensive Braille products so we can make Braille available for more people. We can now say that we have Canada's most comprehensive lineup of inexpensive Braille solutions, including the 20-cell Braille Me from Innovision, the soon-to-be-released 40-cell Orbit Braille display from Orbit Research, as well as the world's least expensive multi-line Braille reader, the Canute from Bristol Braille. You can have a look at them all on our website at www.canastech.com.
Joining us now is Thaddeus from Ebon Sky Studios.
Thanks so much for taking some time out and chatting with us. This is a really sort of a fascinating subject, and I think to a lot of us, it's kind of a subject that's near and dear to all of us geek hearts, which is video games.
Well, thanks for having me.
Why don't we just start out and give us a little bit of just a brief snapshot of Ebon Sky Studios and what you guys are up to there.
I've been a part of Ebon Sky Studios before it was even called Ebon Sky Studios. I joined in 2017 as the third member. Originally, it just started out as two guys who wanted to create an engine which would allow you to make your own maps.
Right.
We had, at that point in time, no thought of making full-fledged games. It was just hey, let's see if we can do it just for the heck of it. Over the years, it kind of just kept evolving and evolving, with the addition of battles, the Z-axis, which was a huge one, items, abilities, and eventually we were like, you know what, we could make a game with this thing. So that's when we kind of decided, okay, well, if we're going to make a game, we've got to start a company and do all that official fun stuff. And that's also around the time when we brought in our fourth guy, Brian, who's our sound editor.
And is that the full team now? Is the four of you guys?
The four of us. Paul in the UK is our programmer. Justin in the US, he is our story design. I kind of help with whatever, and Brian in Australia is our sound guy.
Sounds pretty solid to me. So you've got. I've heard some of the videos that you guys have put out with this Sable engine of yours. It sounds pretty impressive.
Thank you.
You have. So you're basically wanting to do kind of, I presume, single player RPGs with this?
For this point, Sable is currently designed for single players. In the future, we are hoping to have multiplayer, but that's years away if we survive that long. So that's, quite a ways in the future.
And that's, one of the questions I had was, there's been so many, well, maybe not so many, I guess that's relative, but a lot of different people or organizations try to get into the whole accessible gaming industry or field. And, some come and last a few years and others just kind of disappear. So, what was kind of the incentive to launch into this arena?
Well, like I said before, Sable was originally not intended as a full-on game development engine. Before I was even brought in, Paul and Justin had contrived it as a map creation tool. That was it.
And so to be used with other third-party platforms?
Well, just to be used to create maps. Like, I don't know if you've heard of Tactical Battle, but I think the impression was, and I could be wrong here, because I wasn't around at this point. They designed just maps. It wasn't able at that point to do a bunch of the other stuff. Battles and whatnot were all added later. But when we did decide to develop games, it's like, the audio game community has very little in terms of RPG games that you can play, especially considering the amount that the mainstream market has. So we figured, okay, what's the worst that can happen? We try and we fail, right?
Right.
So we're trying, and hopefully we succeed. But if we fail, at least we can say that we tried.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff is simplistic as well. That's the other thing we keep running into is that we'll get an RPG, but it'll be the bare bones of what that could be, and that's just unfortunately a symptom of accessible games. We have a lot of proofs of what could be, proofs of like side scrollers, another example of a genre that we've seen a couple of examples of, but no one's really taken to the extreme. So from what I've heard of this engine, it would be possible to really make a deep game with a good system of mechanics behind it and good world building. And it sounds to me like you've got it so that you'd have an engine that you wouldn't require programming knowledge, which would be great for a lot of us idea people who always want to do stuff but have no idea how the nuts and bolts how to work.
Yeah. That was part of the whole thing, right? Is if Sable's released, we want it to be for the layperson, I think the correct term would be, who doesn't know how to program, but has the ideas for what has the potential to be a spectacular game. And this way, they can make the game without learning a programming language and being caught up taking years to actually code a game from scratch. This way you can just implement what you have into the engine and then do your testing. It should save you time. It should save you a lot of effort.
Yeah, and I think, creativity is your only limiting factor. I've watched a couple of the YouTube demos as well, and I think there was a woman who used the engine as well to create her own little world.
Yep.
And, it sounds like, I think there was a demo that Paul did as well, where it's basically, it's not even a question and answer, but it's that simplistic, it seems.
Yeah, keep in mind, there are limitations to what Sable can do. And this has been where some of our negative feedback has come, is Sable is limited because we don't allow for scripting. But honestly, we're trying to allow for people who don't have that programming experience to be able to make their own games. In the future, will we add scripting functionality? Who knows? It's not off the table. But at this point, we have our focus. And right now, we just want to get Sable to a stable state so we can release our first game using the engine.
Do you guys have a lot of people like beta testing the platform, or just?
We've got several beta testers. Well, no, I wouldn't even call it beta testing. It's more of an alpha stage at the moment.
Right.
We had our pre-alpha demo out to the public back in May. We figured because coronavirus is keeping a lot of people inside and taking away their opportunities to do things with people, that we would give them something fun to play around with for about a month. So we released Sable to the public. We got quite a bit of interest. We got a bit more people, I think, than any of us had expected trying it out. And the feedback we got was pretty good for the most part. So I would say that was a success.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I haven't delved into the whole accessible gaming. I'm totally blind myself, and have dabbled, you know, in and out of different types of genres of games. But, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do with your first release, and, you know, hope to see maybe even a creativity contest, you know, throw it out to the audience and say, let's see what you got. I think, like I said, creativity is the only limiting factor.
Well, we had our first creativity contest. Wasn't judged by us. It was actually judged by the community, at least the audio games in that community. Back when we closed our demo, we had a contest that the 2 or 3 best videos who got voted in the poll would be given extended access to the demo. And that's what I believe you saw the video from Holly on YouTube. She was one of the winners of that contest.
Okay.
So mechanics-wise, for these games, are people limited to your sort of core mechanics, the stats, that sort of thing, or how flexible is that part of it all?
As of this point, they are limited to our classes and our stats, but again, this is because also we're developing our first game. We don't even plan on considering to release Sable until long after our first game is released.
Yeah.
You know, Crimson Eclipse has always been intended to be released first, and then we will consider when we will release Sable. Whether that is after our first game, after our second game, or what have you, that is to be decided.
And you have all the assets and everything to get at least the first game basically nailed down, it sounds like.
That is what our sound designer, Brian, is currently working on. He has, as of this morning, he has developed 2 more of our soundtrack pieces. He is making them from scratch, and I can say, just for myself, that he is pretty talented at what he's doing. He's done his fair share of work with the gaming community in Australia. He does freelance work for mainstream or what have you.
That's music and sound, or
Music and sounds, yes.
Oh wow. Okay, yeah, you do have all the talent. Wow. That's good.
You can look him up at Daisy All Soundworks if you're curious. Figured I'd give a little bit of advertising
Cool.
for him.
Yeah,
He's
that's
developed
awesome.
his own game, so you know you can always check his out as well.
Do we have an
Anything accessible?
for the new game?
His game is accessible. It's called Lost and Hound.
Ah, that rings a bell.
See, there you go.
Awesome.
Do we have an expected date to the new game?
I'll give you a perfectly blunt answer when it's done.
Smart man.
We cannot
Smart man.
and will not give dates because at this point in time, you never know what's going to happen. We've already had things that have held us back
Sure.
longer than we wanted. Personal things and then things with our company that, little hurdles that need to be jumped through, but things just add up, right? So giving a date at this point would be a bit premature.
Be careful with that. I've seen probably, I think we've lost about 3 or 4, like going back to when I started Odyssey in '96. I mean, I've witnessed a number of meltdowns, chiefly because developers couldn't release games when they said they would, and people
Yes,
lost patience.
that's
And,
part of the reason why. And
yeah.
also, we are we need to convince Paul to take a bit of a break from programming once he's made stable for a bit. He's got to take a break for a bit. You know what I mean? He's been programming very hard. He's developed this whole thing on his own because none of us know the language that he's using. And so he's got to take a break. He's got to get out of the mindset for a little bit, de-stress, as you will.
Yep. Are you guys developing mainly for PC at this point in time, or will there be?
Yes, mainly PC currently. Again, in the future, who knows?
Love to see something like this come to iOS. That'd be amazing. But, yeah, PC is really having a moment though too. You should probably catch part of that wave, even if it takes you another year. Heroes Call was enormous when that came out. That was even though it didn't really get to its full. They were going to do a graphical version of it. That never got done. But even still, that was a spectacular success for an audio game.
I'm hoping we'll catch some of that wave if we're lucky enough, and if if our fortune allows, so to speak.
Are you going to be using other acting talent, or are you going to do a speech-driven dialogue? How are you planning to handle that part of it?
It's capable of doing either. So some of it will be TTS based. Some of it we plan on asking volunteer actors. But again, we're not being paid, so they can't be paid. So it has to be volunteer. These people will need to understand that whatever is going on, whatever voice acting they do, they're doing it of their own free will, their own free time. They're not getting any payment for it. They'll get recognition in our credits, but that's about the extent that we can promise them. Because we don't even know how successful we'll be with this.
What about a party-based? And are you planning to implement that at all? Like have a party of characters rather than
it is a party of characters.
Oh, okay.
It is set up so you have currently 4 characters.
Excellent.
And for anyone who has played the demo version of Sable, I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything or giving information that I'm not allowed. You currently have 4 classes. You have the fighter, you have the priest, you have the mage, and then for a little bit of diversity, because you rarely see this, you have the monk. And the monk isn't another clerical type, just to clarify. The monk is more of a D&D style DPS, damage per second type character. Typically a martial artist.
So I'm going to refer this question to Michael and to you, Shadow. I'm from a D&D background then.
Yes. Yeah, it's Thaddeus, not Shadow, just so you... I thought you had my name, and I was like, wait, what?
You came to the room as Shadow, so...
Oh, I forgot my Zoom was set to that. I only used it once.
No, you came in as Shadow, so you are now Shadow.
Okay, well, as long as people on the podcast know who you're talking to, then it's okay.
I've read about D&D. I've never actually played anything more than just a basic game of it with people. But yeah, role playing itself, I've looked around at various systems, thinking of doing one of my own at some point soon. I have an inkling of how hard this is. Like developing a game, a lot of people don't really understand. Even if you take away all the programming and everything else, it still requires a lot of work.
The design and the balancing is
the testing, the rejigging of dialogue, there's so many elements that, just like when I did my guide, I mean, Personal Power, the iOS edition was, I thought going to be like a year tops, it turned into 3.5.
Yep.
Doing that, and it's nowhere near perfect as it is.
I think what would help is if you write a script first. If it's something that contains dialogue, write a script and make sure you have a clear plan on what you want the storyline to be. This is how we did ours. We had a clear plan for a couple years, even before we got to writing the script. We just finished the script. We might have minor edits, but other than that, the script itself is written.
Cool.
So that includes dialogue. That's all the storyline stuff, all the quests and everything. It's completely set, which I think will save you time, because if you have that plan and then you write your script, then it's done. Whereas if you're trying to improvise, which I think some people probably do, there comes a point where it just falls flat.
Yep, and then you have to ask actors to change some of their lines, and that's
and that's more of a pain too. Whereas if you know exactly what you want, then you don't need to get that. And you can just work on, okay, I don't like the way you said this particular sentence. Could you repeat it maybe with a little bit more oomph or what have you, right?
Yeah, that's there's so many pitfalls to this sort of thing. So it sounds like your approach is admirable. Like from what you've told me, you're avoiding a lot of the pitfalls that I have seen developers plunge headlong into. So that's great to hear.
Well, I'm hoping you're right. I really hope we can avoid as many pitfalls as we can. I'm sure there are some we will fall into, but we are doing our best to avoid as many as possible.
Where does the name Ebon Skies come from?
Ebon Sky is from a D&D campaign that Justin and some of his friends had played. I think this was 20 years ago now.
Okay.
I think it was the name of the campaign itself, but he proposed it as a name for the company, and it was pretty much an instant yes. We all like the sound of it. It's unique. It's not something that you might expect, but hey, we like the way it sounds, and I've had a lot of people come to me personally who I've given out my business cards to, and they've told me, they really liked our name. It's not something that you'd consider as common,
right?
I guess. They said it was unique.
Yep.
And that's something you want, right? If you're going to be releasing something, you want a unique name that people are going to remember.
And you want it to fit what you're releasing. I'm presuming the world that you're creating for this first game of yours is going to be fairly dark and edgy stuff, right? Like
very dark. And that's something our audience is going to have to get used to, because I haven't played a ton of audio games, but I know other people who have, and my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, there aren't very many games that are particularly dark.
Yeah, it's slowly that's changing a bit, but that's certainly, unfortunately things have veered into this sort of simple and less fully realized, less deep, and less adult. Like a lot of people want to avoid the whole parental, the parental kind of wave off, right? So they've gone that route, and I'm kind of glad to see a bit more grittiness, a bit more adult-oriented stuff.
Yeah, that's what we wanted, because we wanted something that's a little more adult. We don't want to have to, I don't want to say tame ourselves, because that's not the right way of putting it, but you know what I mean.
Yes. Oh, yes. I've heard some audio sounds recently that have just, some of the audio dramas I've reviewed have had very dark, gritty sound.
Yep.
Graphic audio being one element of that. They do some spectacular stuff in that department.
But it really is a little bit of a fledgling field in terms of accessible gaming.
Oh, no, I would say you're definitely right. Outside of the commonly known, I guess, audio games market, there are some mainstream games that will try and be accessible, but for the most part, you're not going to find that.
Right.
Yeah, that especially on the console side, this is just getting going in the past couple of years, and I think we're approaching a critical mass point where we might see a lot more of that, but it's just now kind of happening. Like, as I've covered it over, from '96, I've seen developers sort of try and expand and try to make livings off of doing this, and it's a hard road. Like, to really, if you're doing this for money, you're not going to get a ton. Audio games, it's been very, very hard. But now what's happening is we're getting some of the mainstream companies paying attention a bit more, and that could change a lot. Plus the population aging. There's a lot of factors like that I think are going to help Ebon Sky and other companies that are starting to really think about, how can we include more people in this game space? How can we make this accessible without wrecking the game itself, right? Which can be a tricky thing. I think some people underestimate that. But now we've got a lot more bright minds. Like, I never thought, for example, something like EA Games would make their football game accessible. Like, that would never have crossed my mind that they would attempt that, and they are now. So things can change, and they are changing now. Finally, we've seen on the iOS front some brilliant stuff. Something else did some amazing audio games. Papa Sangre and its sequel. They had Sean Bean, Cumberbatch. Can't remember his first name.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes, he did Nightjar, one of it. So, they brought in the big marketing bucks, big acting names, and those games had a good run on the App Store before they unfortunately vanished. They were made for everybody, not just blind people, but they thought of us from day one. And I think that paid off and kept them in there for longer than they might have had otherwise. So it is possible. I think people are really starting to appreciate that and include more audio stuff, which I'm pleased as a blind person to see. There are, of course, other accessibility issues that it's not just all about blindness as well. Like, there's efforts to bring other people include them in these playgrounds. And from learning disabilities to motion, sickness, things like that. There are a host of different things, switch-based controls for people who are paralyzed. A lot of different things are now being looked at a lot more seriously than they once were. So,
and see, that brings me to an interesting point, because I have presented Sable at a couple of game conventions. I was at Animathon for 2019 and 2018, and I was at a university game convention back in 2019 as well. And I was told a couple times that Sable and its games, just because it's purely audio based, those are things that you can play if you have, say, motion sickness, because there isn't a visual component. And these were things that, we as a company haven't thought of, but now that it's been brought up, it's like, this is an interesting angle. Maybe there's a possibility that we can get a bit more interest from the sighted community because of things like that.
Right.
Also, the interest in things like alternative gaming. If we can poke some of those people, if we can get some interest, or you have those who just want to play maybe on the bus or in the backseat of a car. I understand that apparently playing in that way when you can see can be a bit of a pain, but if you're just playing based on audio, then it's a bit more feasible.
Yeah, I think you're crossing into the same arena that audio description does for the blind, or closed captioning for that matter. Somebody sighted may take advantage of descriptive audio on Netflix because they're in the kitchen cooking, or into an audiobook, having something playing in the background. Kind of the same idea with an audio game, right?
Yeah, I actually know quite a few sighted people who use audiobooks when they're in the car. It's a good way to read something while driving. Well, you don't have to actually look at the page. You can just have something in the background instead of blaring your music and listen to the same song 6 or 7 times before you get to your destination.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that there's also a unique factor there. Most people, sighted people say who are into video games, the idea of an audio based sort of soundscape type game, there's an appeal to that. It's unique, it's different, and it could be immersive in a way that is that people aren't necessarily used to, and that could be a big draw.
Yes.
And certainly in the Amazon space, in the smart speaker space, we're seeing some of that now, like adventures with full acting and movie quality sound behind them, and they're purely audio. They're games that you speak to with Alexa or with different Google. You can actually do that now. So there's cursed painting is one actually recently that I dabbled with. That was an interesting thing, and it seemed to have a very rich sound work in that. Have you guys had any involvement with the Hero's Call, like during your development process? Did you get to check that out? And
we have not had. Some of us have played it. Some of us haven't. But we started developing. I joined the group in 2017, and we started developing, but Hero's Call was not related in any way to what we were doing.
So it's not really an influence on
no
on your stuff.
No, I've never played it personally, so I can't say that it's influenced me. I've played cited games with a bit of help, but I've still managed, and those would have influenced me. My thought is, hey, it would be nice if we could have accessible, Lord of the Rings games or more accessible Pokemon or what have you, but unfortunately, we don't. And so we've got to just take it and make our own.
Yeah.
Won't be able to make a Lord of the Rings game, but we can make something. We can make a fantasy game. It won't be as awesome as Lord of the Rings, but we do it with what we can.
Right.
And that can often lead to more interest later once the proof of concept is there. I've certainly seen that over the years.
I guess the really interesting part about game development right now, and this has certainly been true in, say, the past 10 years, is just the explosion of indie games and how many small independent developers are sort of able to make a go of it, and especially given all the different digital distribution platforms that are available now to developers. It's a whole new world. What are some of the advantages of being a small studio like you guys are over, say, sort of a larger game developer?
Honestly, the biggest thing I can think of right now for us, and this is both an advantage and a disadvantage, we don't yet have a reputation. And because of that, you don't have, this is where I say it's a disadvantage, is you don't have the people who are loyal to you and going to buy your games, but the advantage is you also don't have any negative press. So you don't have people saying, oh, look, it's these guys, they're famous for doing this one thing, let's boycott them. That is something that can really make or break a company.
Once you get typecasted, it's like there's no redemption in some people's. I've seen that as well.
And typecast is one of the things we want to avoid. That's why RPG is not the only type of game we want to make.
Interesting.
We have other ideas. We eventually would love, this is, again, many years off. If we last long enough, we would love to do an MMO. I personally would like to see some sort of accessible game similar in some ways to Minecraft. So that's my personal project, because Minecraft is something I watch my friends play all the time, and it's like, man, you have no idea how much I wish I could play with you guys, because this is the type of game I would spend hours on.
Well, there's certainly a lot of interest in that. I've seen a lot of discussion threads on the Blind Gamers List and other places about that. You definitely have an audience for that if you manage to pull that off.
Yeah, and if we can do different types of games, then we can, interest a broader range of people. Whereas if we focus solely on the RPG, people are going to be like, oh, it's Ebon Sky Studios, it's the RPG company. You know what I mean? There's going to be people who are just going to say no just because they're like, oh, all their last games were RPGs. This one's going to be another RPG. We don't want to play an RPG.
It's a tough thing to avoid because it takes so long to make a game that your last game, your last game has to represent you and maintain interest in you while you do the next thing.
Yes.
So it's
And
tricky
also we need
getting
to
started.
we need to do it in a time frame that's going to be able to retain their interest long enough without having people starting to drop out. You know what I mean?
Yep. But then you have to think about, you don't want to take too many shortcuts to keep in that time
Well,
frame,
exactly.
or quality
that's-
drops.
That's
Yeah.
the difficulty, right? You know, you've got to find the fine balance, and you're on a knife edge because you could slip just a little bit to one side or the other, and then you plummet, and that's about it.
Yeah, but at least you're aware of the dangers by the sound of it. So I would
We
I would bet
try.
on you guys.
We
I would
try,
certainly
you know.
bet on you guys.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. I hope we can live up to your expectations. And I'm sure that my partners in the company would say the same.
Well, you certainly have me cheering you on. I would love to see more, and like a good solid. It sounds like you've got a good solid core group, which is a good start. And that's another advantage to consider is between the four of you, that's a small enough group that if you can sort of remain on the same page in a lot of ways and avoid hopefully some of the fractiousness that I've seen tear some of the larger groups apart that have tried to pull this stuff off. So that I'd consider when you're when you're thinking of changing that group dynamic. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, I like the current dynamic. Honestly, we've all got our opinions, but when it really comes down to it, we're able to buckle down and get things done and compromise with one another. I admire the others for that because there are points, you have one person's got an idea and they're really set on this idea, but sometimes that idea just doesn't fit. So when we can all compromise on a thing, I think that makes us all stronger for it because we still try to keep everybody in mind when we're making decisions.
I think you referenced, Thaddeus, that you have a vision impairment. Is there anyone else on the team that does also?
3 out of the 4 of us, actually. I've been visually impaired or blind since birth. Paul and Justin have both lost their sight later in life, so they have had a lot of experience playing mainstream games, Final Fantasy. Justin's big into Baldur's Gate and other things along those lines. Brian is fully sighted, so he is, to make the joke, he is our diversity hire.
Token sighty, yeah. Cool.
You gotta have a good sense of humor.
Oh, of course.
So he's providing the alternate perspective to us because he can still play those games, whereas we can't necessarily. Some things we can, but some things we really can't. And he can play, and he brings us the experiences.
Sure.
And considering he's worked with other, he works in the industry, he can help us with the aspects that we aren't entirely sure about,
Well, expectations is a key thing here for a lot of blind people. I've seen this since almost the beginning in '96 when I started the first issue of Odyssey. People want what they sometimes can't fully have. They want the same experience. They want to be included in what the sighted people are doing, and sometimes it's possible with a lot of thought and effort, and sometimes it's harder than they think it is. So you run into the trouble of not having an equivalent experience or other things like that. But it sounds like you've got a lot of background there where you've had experience with it, and people who have had sight, who have taken in that side of the equation. I've come at this from a fully blind. I was born blind, so my father, growing up, and then a good friend that I still have from high school days, have been my window to that world. So I can completely get where that comes from, and you sounds like you've got the group that might really be able to make some breakthroughs, given that experience. That is really promising to hear that the backgrounds you're all coming from could lead to really spectacular stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's assuming that enough people are willing to buy our game to make it worth it to continue.
Yeah.
You know, the whole thing will fall apart if we don't get enough interest in Crimson. Then we're going to have to sit down and say, okay, are we going to realistically continue because we don't have the interest that we hoped for? Are we going to be able to keep on like this? And it's unfortunate, but it's something we have to look at.
Yeah.
Because,
it's reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to ask, like the work in terms of the sound assets and everything else. Like even writers. I mean, I just was listening to Brandon Sanderson doing speeches on writing. He says, "Why are you writing? Right? Is it for money, or is this something that you just feel benefits you enough to keep doing?" And
Yep.
that can be a tough road to walk.
Yeah, and we need to be able to make enough money one way or another to live, right?
Yeah.
If we're spending so much time designing, how much time are we going to be able to spend working, another job? And then with those two things, how much time will we have left for friends, family,
Right.
other pursuits that we want to take up? You know what I mean? It's a fine tightrope to walk, and there comes a point, if we're not making enough one way or the other, we have to figure out, okay, something's got to go, something's got to give.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it's a concern, but at this point, I'm moving forward. The other three are moving forward. We're hoping that we'll get enough interest and we will continue, because after all this time, we refuse to give up. We don't want to drop it. We don't want to give up at this point. We've put in, some of us have put in 4 years.
Wow.
And, thousands of hours to just drop it and then look back and be like, man, look at all that time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
for sure.
It was the same with Personal Power. I was swallowed by that project for 3.5 years, and it got to the point where it's like, no, I'm really kind of burnt out with it. It's hard to maintain with little interest. And
That's
the good thing I've seen with you guys is there's a lot of discussion on audiogames.net. I've seen a lot of big threads about you guys there.
Yeah, Paul's
So-
done a good job of keeping the discussions going on there.
So that if that kind of interest can be maintained on forums like that, and maybe some others, it's kind of too bad that it's a PC only thing. But that's a bit harder. Your best places to focus are audiogames.net, Blind Gamers. There's that list that was once the Odyssey list. Has morphed many times since, but it's still there too. And so there's a few places like that. But it sounds like you've at least got a presence where you need it most, which is good.
Yep. And trying to branch off a little bit into the other markets that we could have access to. Not sure how successful any of those will be, but any chance at attaining any more interest, I think, is a good thing to try. If it fails, then at least we've tried, right?
Yeah, and you've reached out, and that inevitably will bring interest back at some point. So if you can get articles maybe into different forums, different things like that about what you're trying to do.
Yep.
Gamma Sutra maybe that might be something to look at. A bit
That's why
outside the mainstream.
That's why I spent the money. I went to Animathon twice. I've gotten interest from, some pretty big names. We have talked to one of the developers from Max Games. I don't know if you've heard of them. They develop mobile games. We have talked to them, among others, and I think that it's pretty good to at least get that kind of thing out there. Get out there what we're trying to do, even if Ebon Sky doesn't break it out into that market. We put the bug in someone's ear, and maybe other people will consider making games more accessible, and that can only be a benefit to us as audio gamers.
Right.
So
Yeah, there's not enough sort of to more is always better. I think. I've never seen a case where I've thought one game has suffered because another was there.
Mm-hmm.
It's still small enough that we don't have that tendency.
You don't have that
to,
cutthroat competition, so to speak.
Yeah, there's no need for it. There really isn't. Like it's, everyone pounces on pretty much every game that comes out. So, yeah, the more the merrier.
So once you are ready to release Thaddeus, reach back out to me and we'll get you guys back on the show and help announce it.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and on that note too, why don't you tell people where people can find Ebon Sky online if they're interested?
Yeah, so Facebook, Ebon Sky Studios, it's the main place where we post our news. Audio Games Done That forum, Paul does a good job of keeping up the Sable thread on there. We've also got a Twitter at Ebon Sky Studios, and our website, which is still sort of in development, is ebonskystudios.com.
Well, listen, best of luck with the project. I mean, I know I'm excited. I think everybody's excited about that release date. Will be done when it's done. I do like that.
Had to get the blunt answer.
Yeah, I like it. That's the way to do it, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So listen, yeah, we'll be looking out for you, and yeah, feel free anytime you want to come on to make any big announcement. The door's open.
Yes, and thank you for your interest. I appreciate it, and all of the others do as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Thaddeus.
Yeah, thank you.
That's really cool. Those guys, they've got a lot of work ahead of them.
Well, what I find really interesting is that, this game engine that they've created is going to allow anybody without any programming skills to create games.
This could be huge. If that all pans out, like they hope that, this could be really, really huge and let a lot of new ideas and new blood into this space. And that will be fascinating to see trickle out and see how that happens. And of course, their first game, very much looking forward to really seeing what they end up doing as that first This Is Us thing. That is always fascinating.
You're right.
Got some demos on YouTube as well, so I definitely recommend people check them out and just kind of get a glimpse into what they're working on.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's actually really smart because community-driven content is a great way to not only help build content using your engine and your tools, it really drives interest for the game and extends the life of that game. Because when you just develop a single-player game that's completely closed off, that experience, you're limited to whatever, the 5, 6, 10 hours of playthrough, and then that's it, you're done. But when you have community-driven content, you can expand that out and, into hundreds and hundreds of hours. You'd be amazed at what video game communities can come up with themselves.
Oh yeah, there have been games that have kept popular for years and years because of that modding ability of adding in new content, and you still hear people playing them and see tweets about it and things all these years later. Yeah,
so I'm definitely going to keep an eye out on these guys, Ryan, and for sure, when they're closer to actually releasing, we should definitely have them on again.
Absolutely.
And I think we'll create an AT Banter game.
Oh man, what would that look like?
Yeah.
You can go around and play like virtual bop it. You can bop Steve, Rob, Ryan.
Punch it, hit it.
A seek and find game or something.
Yeah.
I like it. Where's Steve? We play that all the time. Hey, Ryan.
Rob.
Where can people find us?
They can find us online at www.atbanter.com.
Hey, they can also drop us an email if they so desire, and they may desire, if they want to say, suggest a topic for a future show, if they want to be a guest, if they know somebody that would make a good guest, if they want to talk, if they want to ask a question, pretty much anything, because you know what? It really brightens Ryan's day when he gets email.
Absolutely.
That isn't it isn't spam.
That's right. You need a new pair of jockey briefs. No, I don't.
I'm telling you, man, those Google ads are scary.
Yeah.
I've literally talked on the phone with somebody about kitty litter or something, and then boom, next thing I know, Facebook or in my Gmail, sure enough, kitty litter ads.
You betcha.
There's some real shady stuff going on. But we digress.
Email address.
Did I not do the email address? They can't. Yes, I did, didn't I?
No, you just said
I don't think so.
some people, but
Amateur, tell you. So you can email us at cowbell@atbanter.com.
they can also find us on Facebook.
Faceback.
They can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, pretty much wherever you find podcasts, we are there.
Excellent. Well, we have to give a big thank you to Mike for joining us today and helping us navigate this conversation, because I feel like without you, we would have been a little bit lost in the woods.
That's
Well,
right.
happy to help, and looking forward to all this output from Ebon Sky. That will be
Yeah, for sure.
fascinating to dip into.
Well,
So
listen.
contact information people can reach you at, Mike?
Yes, they can reach me at michael.feir, that's F as in Frank, EIR, at gmail.com. That's probably the best way. I'm also on Twitter at mfair, and those two are probably the best ways. You can also visit my blog at michael.feir@blogspot.ca.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is going to about do it for us this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening in, and we will see everybody next week.
Bye-bye.
This podcast has been brought to you by Canadian Assistive Technology, providing low vision and blindness solutions across Canada. Find us online at www.canastech.com. That's CANASSTECH.com. Or call us toll free at 1-844-795-8324. For all your assistive technology servicing needs, call Chaos Technical Services at 778-847-6840 or find them online at chaostechnicalservices.com.
Master of the one take.